Hey everyone, before I started the video, I wanted to let you know about my new website, which you can find the link for in the description. Here you can sign up for a free consultation for my new coaching service, which uses depth psychology to help you get a better sense of who you are. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to check that out. Scholars believe that early cave paintings, some of which are nearly 70,000 years old, most likely served some kind of a religious or spiritual purpose. And it is here that we will begin our study of the psychology of religion. These paintings, which can be found all over the world, most commonly depict animals and handprints, but another very common drawing which we find are of these non-existing entities known as therianthropes. These are human-animal hybrids, and these are likely the first supernatural entities which humankind envisioned. Caves were analogous to the first temples, wherein people felt an experience of the supernatural within, almost as if these caves were a portal to another world. Alongside these depictions, we also commonly find these particular markings, and they are amazingly consistent. The researcher David Lewis Williams put forth the theory that these markings represent entoptic phenomena. Entoptic phenomena are patterns which exist inside the structure of the human eye itself, and normally our cognition filters them out. However, we can perceive them when induced by a trance state, or even possibly by an environment like a cave. In a sense, these entoptic phenomena are parts of our unconscious minds, since we can't ordinarily perceive them. Try to imagine what it would be like to be a primitive man and to journey into the cave, guided only by a dim fire. You would experience a descent into a dark realm, and there encounter images which speak directly to the deeper aspects of your subjective experience. It would also invoke a realization that other people experience the world as you do, since they too witness the same entoptic phenomena. This experience is what produces the first inklings of conscious awareness in the human race, as we begin to realize that other people also have their own minds, and can see things that we also can see. This also invokes a sense of connectedness, as we realize that there are certain experiences which are shared by all humans. As I hope to demonstrate, all religious symbols are like this. They originate from the unconscious mind, and serve to link humans to each other in a transcendent experience. Religion is in fact deeply connected to the origins of civilization. The first large settlement produced by humans, Göbekli Tepe, wasn't a house or a place to store grain, but rather it was some kind of temple. Furthermore, in early settlements, the temple was always at the center, forming the nucleus of the community. All early civilizations so far discovered were ruled by priests who seemingly received their orders from the gods. It seems that religion is at least partially responsible for transforming humans into more civilized beings, but how exactly did this occur? The answer has to do with the way religious symbols can grip the unconscious mind and exert a controlling influence over the psyche. Religions almost always involve a series of images and symbols which are derived from unconscious archetypes. These symbols include gods, goddesses, mythology, and iconography, and just like the images in cave paintings, they seem to depict archetypal figures. Archetypes are common to all people, and so an experience of the images derived from the unconscious causes a feeling of connectedness between different people, and this is why religion is always a shared collective experience. Furthermore, religion evokes a feeling of connection with these unconscious archetypes. We see in religion symbols which speak to the deeper parts of the psyche, and this is what gives religion its sense of the supernatural. When early man visited the temple, he would come into contact with statues and paintings which depicted something which spoke directly to his inner experience, and this sense of relatedness separated sacred space from profane space. Everything inside the unconscious seeks external expression, and the temple was viewed as sacred because it illuminated the depths of the unconscious psyche. Jung referred to this experience as the numinosum. Religion, as the Latin word denotes, is a careful and scrupulous observation of what Rudolf Otto aptly termed the numinosum, that is, a dynamic agency or effect, not caused by an arbitrary act of will. On the contrary, it seizes and controls the human subject, who is always rather its victim rather than its creator. The numinosum, whatever its cause may be, is an experience of the subject independent of his will. At all events, religious teaching, as well as the consensus gentium, always and everywhere explain this experience as being due to a cause external to the individual. The numinosum is either a quality belonging to a visible object or the influence of an invisible presence that causes a peculiar alteration of consciousness. This peculiar alteration of consciousness is again why religions can be so possessive. Religious symbols put us in a trance state, since they activate unconscious archetypes, which can act independently of the ego, and it seems as though our minds are drawn to images which allow it to understand itself. Religions provided early humans with a medium through which they could commune with their own unconscious minds, and access the way of thinking which is peculiar to the unconscious. In fact, written records show this quite clearly, as many early kings would consult statues of gods in order to garner their advice. One such king, Hammurabi, spoke to a statue of the god Shamash, and through this developed a law code, the Code of Hammurabi. From a Jungian point of view, Hammurabi wasn't speaking to a real god, but rather to his own unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is filled with extraordinary wisdom, but it is not easy to communicate with. Hence, early religions can be seen as mankind's attempt to reach the inner recesses of his own soul and depict the symbols which arise therefrom, in the form of myths and religious texts. When people heard the voice of God, what they were really hearing was the part of their mind which presented itself as an external authority. Primitive societies make important decisions by consulting the gods, which occurs through trance states or through dreams. Such a consultation is undertaken because the unconscious often has a superior intellect to man's conscious mind. Shamanistic societies operate on this assumption, for which reason they deliberately cultivate states of mind wherein the unconscious may be experienced. From their perspective, they are communing with the gods, since this is exactly what they experience. But knowledge in depth psychology reveals that the gods are autonomous complexes operating through archetypes, and communing with them is the best way to become familiar with these autonomous factors. This wisdom is also often codified in the form of art, myths, and religious scriptures. Since the dawn of humanity, there has been a marked tendency to limit this unruly and arbitrary supernatural influence by means of definite forms and laws. And this process has continued throughout history in the form of a multiplication of rites, institutions, and beliefs. To simplify this, we can say that the main reason religion exerts such a powerful influence over our minds is that it is relatable, that is, it feels familiar. This isn't merely a religious phenomenon, but something which occurs in all people, even today. This is why we develop obsessive fandoms surrounding fictional stories, because we see in them something which speaks directly to our minds. Religions differ in that they are simply taken more seriously, but the psychological effects are the same. This familiarity applies more or less to all people equally, since it deals with the collective unconscious, and so religion becomes a communal affair. In early religions, the most important archetypes depicted were the father and the mother archetypes. Every early religion had a paternal deity and a maternal deity, and these two archetypes, when depicted as religious figures, greatly transformed the behavior of people. The father archetype is related to hierarchical distribution of power within a social group, and it manifests as a tendency to obey an authority figure, as seen in many social animals. Now imagine you believed in a deity who was supreme to all other people. This non-existent entity would exert considerable control over your behavior, since you perceive him to be at the highest point in the dominance hierarchy. And since this deity is always present, it would cause a person's behavior to shift dramatically. In a sense, humans were domesticated by invisible gods, who forced us to uphold a particular moral standpoint. You would be forced to act within the confines of behavior which are societally sanctioned, because you would always feel the presence of this deity hanging over your shoulder. Thus, the father archetype is being utilized in a different way because of religion, and this allows humans to be more cooperative and to obey societal rules. In this sense, religion doesn't just depict archetypes, but functions through them to control human behavior and allow civilization to function. The fact that this archetype can be so gripping enables the development of and obedience to a moral creed, and so the ever-watching God operating through the father archetype forces people to behave morally, however this is defined. Entire cities in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, India, and Greece were effectively ruled by imaginary entities who operated through the unconscious. The mother archetype refers to our desire to be embraced by our mothers so that we can feel a sense of comfort and passiveness. This is an instinctual drive which every person feels, and the mother deity both depicts this archetype and, to an extent, fulfills the role of the mother in adult life, becoming a sort of mother figure for the entire community. The earth is also commonly associated with the mother archetype, and many fertility rituals arose as a result of this archetypal association. Other archetypes are also depicted by gods, such as war gods, who depict our instinctual warrior drive, or trickster deities, who depict our unconscious desire to embrace the profane. Gods also embody archetypal ideas through their mythological actions. For instance, the god Kronos is the father of Zeus, and was in fact killed by him, representing the archetypal desire to rid ourselves of the old authority. And very often, the deeper meaning of a symbol only makes sense within its mythological context. Many religious symbols and gods represent chaos and destruction, such as Shiva or Dionysus, and the idea of chaos seems to be inherently formed within the human psyche, since chaos is a fundamental aspect of reality. This is why mythological symbolism isn't just a failed attempt to explain natural phenomena. It is instead an inadvertent process of depicting our own psychology. Primitive man is not much interested in objective explanations of the obvious, but he has an imperative need, or rather, his unconscious psyche has an irresistible urge, to assimilate all outer sense experiences to inner psychic events. It is not enough for the primitive to see the sun rise and set. This external observation must at the same time be a psychic happening. The sun in its course must represent the fate of a god or hero who, in the last analysis, dwells nowhere except in the soul of man. All mythologized processes of nature, such as summer and winter, the phases of the moon, the rainy seasons, and so forth, are in no sense allegories of these objective occurrences. Rather, they are symbolic expressions of the inner, unconscious drama of the psyche, which becomes accessible to man's consciousness by way of projection, that is, mirrored in the events of nature. Hence, the god of the ocean may be used to explain how the ocean seems to have its own will, but it also represents a part of human psychology, since this idea originally came from the human mind, and so likely reflects its tendencies. Religion's ability to illuminate the unconscious also has a different effect, in that through these symbols, we become more and more aware of our own internal psychology. We begin to recognize our own unconscious impulses, first identifying these as gods, or even as other supernatural entities. Demons, for instance, are manifestations of the shadow archetype, and we first identified this shadow side as a demonic presence attempting to thwart our higher moral intentions. This categorization of psychological phenomena through religious ideas serves two purposes. Firstly, it is what allowed humankind to become conscious in the first place. Consciousness can be thought of as a process of producing symbols in order to describe things which are difficult to articulate. As Erich Neumann wrote, creative evolution of ego consciousness means that, through a continuous process stretching back over thousands of years, the conscious system has absorbed more and more unconscious contents and progressively extended its frontiers. Religious symbols originate spontaneously from the psyche, but to depict these symbols outside of the psyche allows us to understand our own complicated psychological situation. For example, Wu Ji is a Chinese mythological symbol, which is commonly depicted as a circle, and it is meant to represent the primordial universe, where opposites are blended and there is a sense of timelessness. Early man thought that this was a literal description of the universe, but in fact, he was depicting his own psychological situation, since this primordial state is exactly what we experience when we are unconscious children, before the eruption of consciousness. These symbols, again, point to ideas which are difficult for us to grasp, and pondering the meaning of these symbols allows us to grow in consciousness. In exploring the symbol, the mind is finally led towards ideas of a transcendent nature, where our reason must capitulate. Because there are innumerable things beyond the range of human understanding, we constantly use symbolic expressions and images when referring to them. The second effect of this illumination is that it allows the ego to become aware of its unconscious complexes. These complexes are first identified as being gods, for which reason early humans believed that he was essentially controlled by the will of the gods, or other supernatural entities. We can see this in the Iliad, one of humanity's oldest stories, and one where it is clear that the gods have a significant role in human behavior. This is because our own unconscious complexes, which direct our behavior in various ways, were first understood as gods who could seize control of our bodies. An awareness of this fact is actually what gives the ego more control, since we can't do anything about these complexes if we are unaware of them. This is exactly what happens in the Iliad, as the human characters learn to assert themselves, rather than always being subject to the will of the gods. Religious symbols give concrete form to experiences which otherwise lay outside the realms of our perception, thus giving us the means to control our unconscious impulses. Jung argued that when we stopped believing in the gods, we began to assume that all of our behavior was under the control of the ego, which is far from true. Not only is freedom of the will an incalculable problem philosophically, it is also a misnomer in the practical sense, for we seldom find anybody who is not influenced and indeed dominated by desires, habits, impulses, prejudices, resentments, and by every conceivable kind of complex. All of these natural facts function exactly like an Olympus full of deities who want to be propitiated, served, feared, and worshipped, not only by the individual owner of this assorted pantheon, but by everyone in his vicinity. The truth is that we do not enjoy masterless freedom. We are continually threatened by psychic factors, which, in the guise of natural phenomena, may take possession of us at any moment. The withdrawal of metaphysical projections leaves us almost defenseless in the face of this happening, for we immediately identify with every impulse, instead of giving it the name of the other, which would at least hold it at arm's length, and prevent it from storming the citadel of the ego. In this sense, religious symbols act as a kind of safeguard against the forces of the unconscious. When we engage in depth psychology, we attempt to unconceal the unconscious, but this process of unconcealment has already been largely accomplished by religion, and is part of the reason for our current level of psychological sophistication. This is why Jung argued that religions functioned as an early form of psychotherapy, since it has already largely accounted for the collective unconscious, just presented in a mythological format. In the modern world, we still designate churches and temples as sacred spaces, wherein we can connect with something deeper and experience the numinosum. The vast majority of religious people are unaware of the psychological roots of the numinous experience produced by religious symbols, and still believe them to be genuinely supernatural. Furthermore, religions almost always involve ritualistic practices, which themselves also depict archetypal processes, in an attempt to produce the numinous experience. A great many ritualistic performances are carried out for the sole purpose of producing at will the effect of the numinosum by means of certain devices of a magical nature, such as invocation, incantation, sacrifice, meditation, and other yoga practices, self-inflicted tortures of various descriptions, and so forth. The fact that religion interacts with our unconscious minds easily explains why people can be gripped by religious fanaticism, especially when such fervor spreads through an entire group of people. The archetype of the self is particularly possessive, since this is the central archetype which characterizes every human being. Symbols of the self are also, according to Jung, an immensely important factor in psychological healing, since the psyche ultimately seeks balance and harmony. This is why polytheistic religions have slowly been replaced by monotheistic religions, since the monotheistic God better represents the archetype of the self. Religion can therefore also have a healing effect, enriching our minds with symbols which depict the human condition, while also giving us a sense of meaning and purpose. The restoration of psychic harmony is again a reason why many people turn to religion during episodes of psychic distress, since many religions are built upon a foundation which addresses these needs and can give a person a sense of psychological renewal and rejuvenation. When we abandon religion, it seems that the mind automatically produces religious symbols as a way to make a person aware of the wider personality beyond the ego. We should note that religion can exert a powerful influence over our minds, and this fact demonstrates that the human mind is not geared for rationality, but rather for mystical ways of thinking. Rationality is, after all, a very recent invention, and even if we attempt to behave rationally, our more mystical inclinations will inevitably get the better of us. The more natural state of man is to be bound within a religious system, but the powerful effect of religion upon a person's psyche can be extremely dangerous. This is why an understanding of the psychological effects of religion is our best defense against the dangers which religious fanaticism may cause. However, the loss of religion also has serious consequences, since the archetypal energy, which was once bound up in religious symbols, is now released without any containment which religion provides. Psychology solves this problem to a degree, but the vast majority of people are not aware of their psyches. This is why I've set up my own service to help you come into contact with your own unconscious minds. Knowledge of your own unconscious can give you the ability to counteract your complexes and increase your self-awareness. People often find that they are struggling against themselves, but psychic harmony can be restored through consciousness of one's inner psychological processes. Your unconscious also likely possesses a great deal of wisdom, which can benefit you if interpreted correctly. If this sounds interesting at all, but you're not sure if it's a good fit, please feel free to book a free 15-minute consultation with me by visiting my website, link in the description. Thanks for watching. Have a good day, and may good luck always come your way.